What is good, people? We are back once again for the beginning of our 6th week in this Matthew chapter 26, the plot to kill Jesus. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At the same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas. I'm not going to lie. I'm calling him Caiaphas. I don't know what that spells out. We're going with Caiaphas. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. We're rocking with it. The high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and kill him, but not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Jesus anointed at Bethany. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it out over his head. The disciples were indignant when they saw this. "What a waste," they said. "It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. Tell you the truth, whenever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." Now we move on to part 3. Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Now we get part 4, the Last Supper. On the first day of the festival of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal for you?" "As you go into the city," he told them, "you will see a certain man. Tell him, the teacher says, 'My time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus told them and prepared the Passover meal there. When it was evening, Jesus sat at the table with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, each one of them asked in turn, "Am I the one, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who has just eaten from this bowl with me will betray me. For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, "Rabbi, am I the one?" And Jesus told him, "You have said it." As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine, gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Now we move on to Jesus predicts Peter's denial. On the way, Jesus told them, "Tonight all of you will desert me, for the Scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." Peter declared, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, Peter. This very night before the roosters crow, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." "No," Peter insisted, "even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the disciples vowed the same. Now we move on to Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here, I will go over there. Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little further and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." And Jesus left a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things again. Then he came to the disciples and said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest, but look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here." Now we move on to Jesus is betrayed and arrested. And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor, Judas, had given them a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss." So Judas came straight to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Jesus said, "My friend, go ahead and do what you have come for." Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. "Put away your sword," Jesus told him. "Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us? He would send them instantly. But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now?" Then Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you have come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was teaching there every day." But this is all happening to fulfill the words of the prophets as recorded in the scriptures. At that point, all his disciples deserted him and fled. Now we move on to Jesus before the council. Then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of the high priest, where the teachers of religious law and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it all would end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who could lie about Jesus so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they could not use anyone's testimony. Finally, 2 men came forward who declared, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Well, aren't you going to answer to these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus replied, "You have said it, and in the future you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his honor and said, "Blasphemy! Why do you need other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict?" "Guilty," they shouted. "He deserves to die." Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists, and some slapped him, jeering, Prophecy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?" Now we move on to Peter denies Jesus. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over and said to him, "You were one of those with Jesus, the Galilean." Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Later, out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those standing around, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Peter denied it. This time with an oath. I don't even know the man, he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be one of them. We can tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And he went away, weeping bitterly. So there we have it, people. The longest chapter we've had to read so far. Start with the plot to kill Jesus. I mean, it's crazy to think of how corrupt human nature is. That these people decided, because they didn't like Jesus and what he was saying, pretty much, they didn't like being challenged, that he had to die. I personally don't like being challenged sometimes. Sometimes I'm in the right mood, and I understand that, you get challenged on, what you do, how you act, what you say, things like that. And it can be a great moment for improvement. I mean, to think that he was killed for that just goes to show how far we have fallen from God. We move on to Jesus anointed at Bethany, where he says, in verse 13, "I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." I mean, that's crazy. If we back up in verse 12, we've obviously talked about what the deed was, where he says, "She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial." There's 2 sort of insane parts here. Number 1, Jesus is talking about his body being prepared for burial before he is dead. Secondly, he's saying this is a good thing. This is a historic, incredible thing that will be remembered and discussed forever. I don't know about you, but if my body was being prepared for burial while I was alive, I probably wouldn't be too pleased with the person who was doing it. I'd probably think that that's insensitive and awful. He's saying, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. I mean, he says it's a good thing, too. In verse 10, but Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me?" I mean, truly the lesson. I just wanted to point out those crazy things there that he's being shown. He's preparing to die, and he's saying it's a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing for you and I. This is horrible for Jesus. Obviously, we want to point out the lesson of this specific section is him trying to teach the disciples who were being critical of this woman, as we see in verse 8, when it says the disciples were indignant when they saw this. "What a waste," they said. Verse 9, "It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor," being overly critical. They're essentially saying, why would you praise God when you can praise others? So yeah, let's keep in mind our praises to the Lord. Where Jesus says in verse 11, "You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." He's not saying don't help poor people. Obviously, you should help poor people, but give to the Lord as well. We move on to where Judas agrees to betray Jesus. I think so often people think of Judas and they think that guy's awful. How could he? However, Judas was one of the 12 disciples. This is part of his life that gets overlooked, which means Judas was one of the closest people to Jesus, saw him every single day, doing things every single day. And he betrayed Jesus. So what does that tell you about us? Don't sit here thinking you're better than Judas. And you would never. Because every action you take that is not perfect is first of all. Second of all, I know so many people who, like the disciples, deny Jesus when they're in a situation where it's uncomfortable. Table that for a minute. We'll come back to that when we discuss Peter. But don't sit here and act like you are better than Judas because he agreed to betray Jesus. You have also betrayed Jesus. Less directly, but you have betrayed Jesus yourself. Don't get it twisted. I mean, so have I. We all have. That's the point. Then we move on to the Last Supper. Here we have the addition of communion, foundation of that being established. How cool is that? Yeah. So for those of you who've never really understood the significance of communion, what it means. Whenever you eat the bread or the cracker or whatever your church uses, it's symbolizing the body, the physical human body that Christ has sacrificed for us. So when we eat the bread, filling ourselves with him, with his body, filling ourselves with the body of Christ. And then when we drink well, I guess for me personally, grape juice, because apparently, because kids they have kids involved in communion, handing out wine kids is illegal. Apparently, I didn't know that. Who would have thought? But when you drink that, it's symbolic of the blood, obviously, like they say, the blood that poured out from his body as he was sacrificing. So when you do a communion, you are receiving the blood that was sacrificed for you, the body that was sacrificed for you. You're receiving the sacrifice. So just think of how crazy that is the next time your church does a communion. I know it can be one of those things, especially for people who have been in church for a while, that you just kind of do it. But sit down and think. Truly think about what's happening there. Let's move on to Jesus predicts Peter's denial. We talked about Peter's denial a little bit earlier. I said we've all in uncomfortable situations turned our back on God and denied him, or at least I have personally. But I want to talk about that at the end. This one, I want to talk about Jesus looking God in the flesh in the eyes. Keep in mind, he's legitimately seen him in his pure, heavenly, godly form and saying, no, Jesus, you're wrong. Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. So you say to Peter there, man, love the spirit, love the attitude. You're telling God he's wrong? Really? Brother, have you not learned yet? I have a feeling that when Jesus says something's going to happen, it's probably going to happen. I mean, I don't know. He's only told them exactly what's going to happen. Feels like 12,000 times throughout the book of Matthew that we've read. But yet somehow Peter is standing up here. No, you are wrong, Peter. I love the sentiment, man. However, you gotta come to grips with it. That's who you are. You're the one who's going to deny Christ 3 times before the rooster crows. And that's okay. I mean, it's not okay. You shouldn't deny Christ. Bad. But so many people are like Peter, refusing to come to grips with how bad they really are. No, God, you're wrong. I am not a terrible, horrible, awful sinner. I am actually pretty all right. There are so many people. I mean, this is also Peter thinking that he knows better than God, or knows more than God. Let's check your ego at the door, Peter. I appreciate the sentiment of I will remain faithful to you to the end. And he did. All of the 12 disciples were killed in some way or another for their faith. So he did die for his faith. However, not in the way Peter was describing. So yeah. In case you're unaware, no matter what it is, if God tells you something's going to happen, it's going to happen, whether you like it or not. Sorry. Actually, now as we move on to Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, we get a sort of micro betrayal here. He talks about verse 40, then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Verse 41, keep watch and pray so that I will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. It's sort of a micro betrayal here. Jesus asked them to come with him and to keep watch as he prays. He knows nothing's going to happen, but he's asking them to keep watch. And he comes back and they're asleep. They're all asleep. They're passed out. In fact, he does this 3 times. They're all asleep. So they're already betraying Jesus' trust, and we haven't even gotten through it yet. So yeah, I feel like that's a sort of a subtle foreshadowing. Another subtle foreshadowing, Jesus being betrayed, is verse 46. And he says, up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. I feel like in a way, obviously he's talking about Judas, but also in a way, he's talking about all of us. They had all just betrayed his trust, and we have all betrayed God. So yeah, I feel like that's sort of less than subtle foreshadowing. as we move on into Jesus being betrayed and arrested, that section, I find it funny. We talk about in verse 50 when Jesus said, "My friend, go ahead and do what you have come for." He's not even pretending to like play around with him. He's like, "Just buddy, I know why you're here. Just do it. Let's get this over with." He's like, I know what's happening. Okay. Just pull out the guards. Let's get me under arrest. Let's get going. But I also find this interesting because this is Jesus sort of revealing his all-knowing nature to them, right? Which he's revealed before, but he's just kind of doing it again, just as a sort of reminder of like, guys, I am aware of what's happening at all times. You're not fooling me. So it's kind of a display of power. But then as we move on, we see Peter. I'm sorry. It says, but one of the men, it's believed to be Peter, heavily implied. I believe in the book of John, which we'll get to at some point. They talk about this event, and he sort of like discloses that it was Peter, just so you know. I was unaware of that actually until a pastor at my church pointed that out. Shout out Pastor Jeremy, because we're doing a series on Peter. Anyways, random side note, not necessary, but he feels the need to pull out his sword and to defend Jesus, the same Jesus who's showing off his power a few seconds ago, being like, hey, even though there's been no evidence of this, like physical evidence, I am aware of why you're here. I know what's going on. So let's get me arrested. Put the cuffs on. Let's wrap her up, guys. But somehow Peter, but I guess not Peter, thinks that guy, the all-knowing, all-powerful God who has seen do miraculous things, he needs to be protected. So let me pull out my sword. And then Jesus instantly, in verse 52, is like, brother, what are you doing? When he says, put your sword away. Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us and he would send them instantly? He's like, he's telling him, this is supposed to happen. I've told you this so many times. I feel like that's kind of the tone. You're like, brother, I've said this. I've told you this 1,200 times as we've just read through the book of Matthew about Jesus predicting his death. He's like, I've told you this. And he had told him this in this chapter. We go back earlier in this chapter. He says in verse 2, as you know, Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Hey, he's saying, do you not pay attention? Man, you gotta love Peter. Never seen a man with so much faith have so little faith. It was not understanding the plot. That's okay, because neither do we most of the time. And now we move on to Jesus being brought before the council. I find it interesting, the fact that they had to bring witnesses to falsely testify. It says that there were many who were willing to come forward and just straight up lie about Jesus. There was only a couple they could actually use. The only way they could disprove Jesus was by just lying about him. And what he said isn't even actually a lie. They just didn't understand what he means. He says, verse 60 further down, he said, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, first of all, let's talk about this. Now, obviously, Jesus isn't talking about the actual physical temple of God, like the actual temple. He's talking about himself being killed and then brought back 3 days later. However, I feel like if the only evidence you have to put a man to death is, he said I could destroy a building and then build it and then rebuild it in 3 days. I don't think that's sufficient evidence to kill someone. I'm not gonna lie to you. Now, I find it interesting that they say false witness, because that could imply that this guy knew and understood what Jesus was saying, comprehended, and just decided to go against him anyways. Craziness. So yeah, that points to some of us out there who know the truth of Jesus and just decide we're not going to follow it. No, I know there's people out there like that too. because I've been in that spot. I've always known God, but there have been points in my life where I was like, no, I don't wanna. So let's not be those people, all right? Now we finally get to the part that I've been talking about earlier, where Peter denies Jesus. Now let's talk about why Peter denies Jesus. Peter denies Jesus because he is afraid in this moment that he will be killed for his faith. Now, like I said, eventually he will be. Thankfully, he learned his lesson that Jesus is worth dying for. But first of all, the same Peter who earlier said, no, God, you're wrong. I would never deny you. Right. So turns out, obviously, God's not wrong. Secondly, it's like I said earlier, we have all been Peter. Get into a tough spot. You're at school surrounded by a bunch of people who, for some reason, you don't know why, but they hate God. They're like all of a sudden the most staunch atheists in the world. God sucks. Some of them could be your friends. And then all of a sudden they find out you go to church and whatnot, and you're getting bullied and you're getting picked on and you're getting made fun of for it. This is a real situation I have been in before. And you're like, no, I don't go to church like Jesus. Like, what is that? Like, Jesus? But honestly, we have less justification than Peter did. Peter was afraid for his life. We are afraid for our social standing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of you are out there are living in a nation in which worshiping God is illegal and like you could legitimately be killed for it. But I know I have the YouTube statistics. I know where the majority of my audience resides within the old US of A. And we're all of us who deny Christ are denying Christ because it puts us in a socially awkward position if we tell the truth of our faith. Hey, guys, let me just say something real quick. Why are we trying to appease the same people who killed Jesus? This is the same like brand of people killed Jesus Christ. You're trying to appease the world that killed Christ. Maybe let's think about that real quick before you're in that kind of situation and you decide that your best course of action is to say, oh, Jesus? No, I don't like Jesus. Really? So yeah, let's think about that. Honestly, truthfully, whenever I read about the death of Jesus, it's one of those things that makes me both angered and appreciated. I'm very appreciative that Jesus died on the cross. Probably the one thing I'm the single most grateful for in the entire world. But it makes me angry and disappointed that our world is so sinful that we determined that God in the flesh had to die. It's sort of a cold reminder of the reality of the world. I pray that one day everyone would grasp just how awful that is. We should pray. Dear God, I come to you, Lord, and I want to thank you for allowing your Son to die for us, to give us the opportunity to join you in heaven and to be saved. God, I come to you and I want to apologize for how messed up our world is. This world is so awful that we determined that your Son, God in the flesh, had to die because he said some things we didn't like. God, I pray that those out there who don't understand just how tragic the death of Jesus is and just what it means for all of us out there and how far this earth is from heaven, God, I pray that they would understand. Pray, God, that all of us Christians out there would not be like Peter in his moments there, and no matter what, we would stand by you and we would stand up for you. And in your name I pray, God. Amen. Thank you all for your time.